it doesn't matter which position you're in, you will always be working with contracts. Wherever relationships are concerned, there will be one form of a contract that will be set out. But to help us in this conversation, I'm definitely not the expert. We've got an expert who will be joining us. It's Dr. Miskyah Toth. She is the CEO of BDCS, which is the Business Development Contract Services. And she will be helping us in speaking about how we can leverage and also negotiate in order to grow our businesses, especially when we're leveraging in for those in-demand skills. So let me not wait any longer. Dr. Mish is here and she will introduce herself and also just give us an overview of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll get in with the conversation. Dr. Miskyah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mokoena, and thank you so much for everyone joining us. It was lovely to see all the different areas represented. So warm welcome to all of you. And you know what, when people call you an expert, it's a problem because you wonder, am I really an expert? I want to say from the onset, I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot speak on contractual law 100%, but I've learned over so many years of experience and what we're in, how to leverage contracts and how to make sure that we run smooth and good businesses. I think just to start as a foundation, Mokoena, what's always important is to understand where contracts originate from. I mean, what is a contract? Contract is an agreement between two parties or more to say, this is the one, give this, the other one takes that. What are we agreeing on? It's really just an agreement between people, but that agreement is now based on the law. That's why it's now becoming a legal document. So we can agree on something and we can decide tomorrow, I don't feel like it anymore. But when we start to do a contract, it becomes legally binding. And that is the difference. That's what we're talking about. In order for us to understand, and for today's purposes, I want to talk a lot on contracts in terms of staffing, in terms of employment, because our company, BDCS, we're a temporary employment service, so we obviously offer that. We make sure that things are always in line, because unless they're in line, it can cost you a lot of money. So when we look at the law, we've got the contract. Contract's an agreement between two parties, and there is something that they exchange in there. That is vital to understand. And I'm sure you think, well, that's very basic, and it is very basic. But unless we keep to the truth of what it is, we will always go wrong. You cannot take what you feel you want and put it in a document and it becomes legal. That is very important to understand. Where sometimes people want to employ staff or they want to get somebody to do work for them, and it becomes very biased because this is what I told you I want you to do, da 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 da. But what we have to go back to is the foundation of contracts, which is the number one, the constitution of our country. So let's start with South Africa. Everything in the law is built on our constitution. What is the constitution of South Africa says? Now, when we get again to staff and to people that we employ, South Africa's constitution talks about human rights. Yes. What does a human have a right to? So let's just stick with that one thing to keep it simple. The Constitution says that we have to bear in mind human rights. From the Constitution, the law is then written. That is how it originates, and that's how it changes. So we look at the Labor Relations Act, if I come back again. The Labor Relations Act cannot just be written, based on nothing. It is linked to the Constitution. So your act will always protect human rights, especially in the employment sector. So there are certain slight differences that we're going to look at today where the act, but when we talk about the act and bigger companies, or even if you've got a small company, please bear this in mind. The act will not stipulate to you the conditions of employment. The act will say to you, for instance, let's say somebody needs to go for a hearing. The act will say, give them reasonable time to prepare. So the act Act doesn't say 48 hours or 36. You know what I'm saying? The Act says reasonable. Now, reasonable can be a very wide word. The Act can say you need to be reasonable in the hours that you allow people to work.
Mhm.
But the Act doesn't say exactly how many, because from the Labor Relations Act, you actually go into basic conditions, which is now stipulating factors. The basic conditions will tell you that you cannot let people work more than a certain amount of hours per week, 45 hours. It stipulates specific conditions. It stipulates sick leave. It stipulates you cannot let a person work for longer than 5 hours. And for any person that's serious about their business and when they're employing staff, study this. There are very good employment contracts around there, but make sure you do not contract out of law because you can't. And that is a point we're going to discuss again. What am I mean when I say contract out of law? We cannot put something in our contract with somebody else that's against the law. Because
Yeah.
once it's against the law and once it's against the Constitution, it becomes illegal. And if you have to go to court, what they're going to tell you? But you put something in your contract that is not even part of our legal system.
Mhm.
We've got a very huge number of employees. For instance, some of our employees are drivers. Now, we've had cases where our drivers would drive. We clocked one in an accident on 176 kilometers per hour. You can understand now. What do you do? My contract doesn't have to stipulate that this person will lose his job for that because he's
Yeah.
actually not just breaking a company policy, he's also breaking the law. So
Yeah.
if we then again if we look at the labor side, in the labor industry, we have now different what we call bargaining councils. They have what they call main agreements. So once again, they decide what will happen in that specific sector. This is South African law. If you are, for instance, within a company that operates 7 days a week, maybe 2 days in the week is quiet, but Sundays is their most important day. That becomes a normal working day in their contract when they employ people. It is not the same as for a person under basic conditions. Many of these people actually then also have something what they call not just, they say you've got a minimum wage. We call it a wage determination. So that is a legal document. You cannot pay somebody less than this.
Yes.
If you are, most people that will listen to me today, if you're employing staff, most staff fall under basic conditions. So if you've got a copy of the basic conditions, make sure you understand it. Because even if there's something in your contract that is not aligning with that, if you go to CCMA or you go to a lawyer or to a judge even, they will tell you, listen, man, this is not valid. But once you've got your main agreement, once you've got your sectoral agreement, once you've got your basic conditions, companies do the following. And I don't know my audience exactly. If you are a big company, you will have it. If you're not and you're growing your company, start it from as young as possible because I've done that. And we've grown into thousands of people, and if we don't have this we will have so many complications. What we do then from the law is we actually draw up what we call a code of conduct and company policies and procedures. So now we say, listen, you're starting to work for our company. These are the legal documents. This is your contract. These are your working hours. This is what we expect from you. But on top of that, this is the company policies and procedures. That
Mhm.
policies and procedures must be once again founded on the law. We
Yeah.
go right back to human rights. Can you understand? So I can't have a company policy and procedure in my company that overrides the law because then I'm
Mhm.
breaking the law. So as an employer, you'll be on a bad footing the moment you start already. So we write company policies and procedures, we write company codes of conduct, and we make sure every single person that starts in the organization actually understand that, know what they're in for, what's going to happen here. So I wanted to start today with this in mind that wherever you go, because we're going to talk about global contracts. We're going to talk about things that are not now employee based today. But wherever you go, understand that the law always underwrites, must always underwrite your contract. That's always must, if you go and look, what does the law stipulate about something, it must be part of your contract.
All right, thank you so much, Mishka. I really think a lot of times we just like this is general knowledge, right? It seems like it's general knowledge, but maybe not. And you've worked with a lot of companies that have done some contracts, whether it's with staffing or whether it's vendors or whether it's business to business. Just let me know, like, what are the challenges that you have found that a lot of businesses had to encounter, especially when it comes to setting up contracts, like I said, whether it's with staffing or whether it's with vendors or business to business?
I think it's the factor of expectation. If you do not understand the fundamentals of your contract, and everybody doesn't understand the expectation from that contract.
Mhm.
So that's something that we have encountered time and time after again. And that's also in business, even in a small business. You want to go in, somebody comes and sells you a contract to start perhaps with renting a printing machines.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do not explain the fine print, and you might be sitting with a contract for 5 years that you've got to pay, but that machine is not going to last for 5 years. Can you understand? So I'm not saying it's, yeah, I am saying it's happening. So where it people do not always stay in terms of the law. But if you've signed that contract and you said, I only want to pay it over a period of 5 years, then what can you do? So we need to be extremely wise when it comes to contracts. When we go for something, technology moves very fast. And I've seen the disappointment in people that they go into contracts for many, many years, and tomorrow that thing is not even workable anymore, but you've still got to pay for it. Be careful for loopholes like that. What we've seen is in terms of employment contracts. If an employee doesn't understand the context, look at, for instance, South Africa, the different languages. You see, you have to be able to prove when you go, if some case goes to CCMA, how do you prove that the person that you actually gave this contract to understood you? Is the
Mhm.
person well versed? How can they, do they understand English?
Yeah.
What did we do to communicate properly? This is my expectation, and this is what's going to happen. So these are things that I've encountered over and over in business as a businesswoman. Look, man, I don't even allow it anymore. When you start in business, you're still very kind and nice and soft and sweet, and people come to you and they want to sell everything. When you
Yeah.
grow in business, you understand now I've paid my school fees, So I'll tell people, doesn't matter who tells you what, do homework. Understand contracts are binding. If it's legal and you have agreed to that contract, it's binding. Now, can you imagine you've still got to pay out? I'm talking about leases.
Mhm.
People negotiate premises. They think, say for instance, we think we're going to have this big company. Let me get the nicest offices, the biggest offices, but I'm not there yet. It's not wise because you're going to have to pay that. And if it's a contract, and a lot of times landlords will pull a contract out for 5 years even. Try and get the duration of your contract short as you can without harming yourself. And make sure that you do not enter a contract before you're ready for it. Your business will always tell you, now I am ready. Look at alternatives because you don't want to disappoint yourself and that person. There's nothing worse than to pay for something that you
Yep.
don't need anymore. And you just got to keep on paying it. This is like court cases. The court case is more expensive. So when we look at contracts, please make sure that you don't do something that is not, nobody's going to listen to you. Your lawyer's fees will eventually be more expensive. So does that make sense?
Makes a whole lot of sense. Just as we continue in this conversation, if you do have a question, please do ask that question. I do have a little bit of a situation right now. My battery is low, so do give me a second to quickly charge that. And then as I'm charging it, please, if you do have a question so far, please do ask us. Let me just quickly go off on my video and I'll be back in a second.
While we're waiting for Mokoena, I just want to mention from my side that as we just spoke right now, it is vital. It's your business. It's your future. If you do go into a contract, understand the cost, calculate the cost, understand interest rates, understand who you're dealing with at the other side. Is this a reputable company? There are so many companies out there that's not reputable today, and I don't want to say I'm sorry to say it, but it is the truth. Be very vigilant as a business person whenever you negotiate any contracts. And then on the other side, be very good with your own contracts. Be fair because people will get to know you and it builds a good reputation. We as BDCS is an employment provider. You know, it is like a marriage. A contract in a marriage only become really important when there is a divorce now coming. So in the beginning, when you fall in love, that contract is still like amazing. Nobody thinks I'm going to need it. But when you decide to go on to a divorce, then it's when you start to almost become enemies, then reinforce a contract. Then a contract's reinforced. And it's the same in business. When we are in business, in the nice days, where we think, oh, so wonderful to have this thing, or this is so fantastic. Be careful of that because think, if this goes wrong and there is a situation where both parties are unhappy, what is going to be the consequences to yourself and your business? And if we do not deal with a reputable providers, the consequence is they simply liquidate their businesses and you can get nothing out of them. So still just be extremely careful.
All right. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, Dr. Miskyah. We've got a question from Ubekiwe Kumalo, and he's asking, is there an industry in South Africa that can be guided outside of the legal requirements of BCEA?
It depends. I'm not understanding 100%. Your basic conditions of employment is for companies that do not have. There's always something like the basic conditions, BCEA, or similar. So if you're in an industry like the motor industry, the entertainment industry, they all know who they are. They do not operate according to basic conditions of employment. They have something that they call a main agreement. And if he's looking at something like that, he needs to go and read up which one. There are different main agreements. There are different sectoral agreements in our country that will protect that specific industry. I hope the answer is what he was looking for.
I hope so too. So now I'm just going to get into something that you've just mentioned quite briefly when it comes to hiring staff, but also doing contracts cross-culturally and also cross-border. So do let me know, what are the cultural and legal differences that companies should consider when they're working with international contracts?
So the first thing is the staff in South Africa is protected by South African law. So if you have an international company who wants to use South African staff, that company must align to South Africa. They need to know, okay, the company must align to what's happening culturally. So it's an investigation. It's good for them to get a partner in like we do, BDCS, investigate this. See, is this the culture that you can actually have in your company? But if they base in any other country than South Africa and they start employing staff in South Africa, it's the same all over the world. If we employ staff in a different country, it's like tax laws. We cannot apply the same tax laws. If the money has been generated in that country, it is subjected to the laws of that country. and bearing that in mind is exceptionally important. Sometimes certain companies, even from South Africa, wants to expand internationally, wants to expand into Africa. Like it's a very good idea to keep a good supplier that you know, because we understand, like BDCS understand the fundamentals of our clients. We know what they need in their staff. But to go and negotiate, because we've got a payroll system that can run right through the world, but we don't have the banks. You understand? You've got to be able to negotiate with the right people while you keep your core function right. That is why outsourcing of this function is so advisable, because you don't want to lose your focus when you move to a new country. As if a company wants to go to a new country, they should actually give this to specialists. They should trust their service provider, their temporary employment service provider enough to make connections in other countries, because you'll have to partner as well with the right people.
All right, thank you so much for that. Like I'm looking at the time right now, and look, this is a very, very broad conversation. I think it would take days to actually look at it holistically. But I do want to get into a couple of things, right? I want us to be able to, at the end of the day, give everyone some practical ways as soon as they walk out of this masterclass so that they are able to implement those things. Let's start with the foundation of a contract. What are the must-haves of a contract, of any kind of contract?
It's also going to depend again on what type of contract you have. But the must-haves is that you're very clear on certain things. Um, you and the other person must agree on what's in that contract. I'm just going to veer back a little bit again about employment. But if the contract stipulates that this is a temporary contract of, temporary employment, there's going to be a start date, there's going to be a finish date. So there's no expectation of permanent employment. So these are things to look for. If the contract stipulates there's a probation period, the employee needs to understand that after the probation period, there's a vigorous checking. So when we look at this, the fundamental thing is, like I said before, never contract out of law. When you have a service provider, a lot of people today with Gen Z, with the new way things are happening all over the world. People don't always want to work for a company from 8 to 5 anymore and stuff like that. There's this temporary thing. Then the service provider, understand now the employee becomes a service provider, needs to have a document already. And that document will stipulate what can I offer and what do I expect in return. So the expectation must be very clear. Once again, never out of law. Don't build anything that you do out of law. Put into your contracts. If there's supposed to be the POPI Act in South Africa is very important, the Privacy Act. If that should go into your contract, it should go in. If you want the people that you are busy negotiating with, whether it's staff or whether it's a new supplier, not to talk about what you are busy negotiating, then there should be a confidentiality clause in your contract as well. The contract must always stipulate these things. A contract must always refer to what area are we going to use now. Say, for instance, we're talking about a commercial contract. Where is your domicile? Where is your house? Where am I going to send the stuff to? What are you handing to me or to a party, as if something goes wrong again? Which magistrate court or which court is this going to go to? That's important when you actually negotiate from the beginning your contract. These are things that I will keep very good track of. Oh, what have I done here? Something popped up in front of me. Couldn't see your face. Yeah, so again, that is vital. Look at the basic things of your contract. Do not enter a contract that you feel uncomfortable with. I'm not a lawyer. I said it from the beginning. If you are entering a contract, especially with a financial commitment, and you're not sure, go to a lawyer. It's worth it. It's worth it because they can guide you from the beginning.
All right. So what has just popped up on your screen is a poll, just so we can have a gauge of who we have in the room today. So the first question is, are you an HR professional? If not, what is your profession? And the second question is, what is your biggest challenge in contract management? So do let us know, just so we can gauge exactly where we are. So if any of the questions, in fact, the second question is quite big. What are the biggest challenges in contract management that people have had? So we could pick one up just so that we can ask you, Dr. Mish, just where we are in that. But just another one. So you spoke a lot about making sure that we never contract out of the law. That's one. So that means that we need to do our research when it comes to the different laws that we have in South Africa. And then obviously with our expectations, what are our expectations, and also to just never sign anything you are uncomfortable with. So now I'm in the room. I am having whether I'm hiring a new staff, especially a high-skilled staff member, whether it's contract, short or long term, or whether I am having a business deal with another business. Here comes the contract. We know our expectations, but I kind of want to leverage on my negotiation skills. What are your top tips when it comes to negotiation?
I think one of the first things that I want to say to you when you're busy negotiating, always think about the future, always think about impact. If something is going to harm you, please, it may not harm you today, but if there's anything in a contract that can harm you, even to such a degree that you might lose everything you've got, there is no negotiation in terms of that. So stay very focused. You know, sometimes I say to my staff when they bring business in, have you checked this company? Do we want to deal with them? Are they going to pay our fees? Because if they can't, I'd much rather go and lie on the beach and enjoy my day, you know, and wait for a company that is proper. So once again, if something makes you uncomfortable, just say no. You don't have to take anything. There is such an overabundance of supply in South Africa that you can always go to somebody else. So your no definitely must stay a no. If there's something that can harm you, something that can take you out of business, something that can, don't do it. Then if you start to use and leverage your contract for what can be beneficial, I do think we should do that, and we should think about both parties. So when we see a contract and we realize there's something in there, I'll tell you one thing that's very important. Like, for instance, with us, we're dealing with huge companies. They have a lot of trucks, we're doing logistics, etc., etc. Now, initially, when we looked at our SLA, it stated that if there's an accident, etc., etc., we're responsible for the costs. Now, we have to understand that you cannot take responsibility for somebody else's things. So that company has a contract and they have insurance. So if you don't have insurance for something, they won't insure it. I can tell you now from experience. If you're giving a service to somebody and that person is now having a car accident or something happened, hijacking, etc., etc., you cannot pay it. We as a service provider cannot pay it. If it's in the contract, you need to eliminate that and tell them, listen, even now, if that should happen, we cannot take that responsibility on us. You need to leverage your knowledge. You need to understand your client, need to understand that what I'm prepared to give you cannot take something that is completely impossible. You've got to take and I think when we use contracts to leverage what we want to do is knowledge of how it works, knowledge of how our industry works is important. Do never be bullied into anything. If you feel uncomfortable, like I said before, take the contract back, ask somebody, and somebody will tell you. A proper lawyer will say to you, this thing can harm you down the road. I know most of us try to be really nice and kind when it comes to these things, but you know what? People don't always like us. Well, I'm very grateful that over the last 5 years, we've grown 600% in growth. People say they've never seen such growth, but there is a reason for growth, and that is that we also don't accept when anything comes to us that's not supposed to come to us. Please always remember that and bear that in mind when you are in business. Does
Okay.
that answer your question? Yeah.
Does answer the question because I think a lot of times we get, and I like the fact that you mentioned the kindness part because we want to be nice, we want to keep the relationship, and we always of the thought that if I lose this contract, I'm not going to get anything else. But
Yeah,
like
it's not.
abundance of contract services and people that we can work with, it doesn't have to be that one person. There's a question here coming from Anonymous. There's two questions, in fact. And the first question is, whom within a business is legally allowed to change or adjust employment contracts? And then secondly, should these documents always be reviewed and signed off by legal or legal
Yeah.
consultant?
Yeah, it depends on how big your business is, for instance. So in our business, our HR department will do it. And eventually sign off still happens by me with me because I'm the CEO. But the CEO or the highest level of person in the company will delegate authority. It's important because unless somebody is actually duly authorized to sign, it doesn't mean anything. And employment, especially employment contracts, especially all these things we're talking about, must be updated regularly. Policies and procedures must be updated regularly, and these updates must be visible in the company. Signed off, our company CEO signs them off, most of it. It gets bigger, bigger, bigger. Then you have your different directors, but it cannot just be anybody that sign it off. Your
Okay.
HR manager, again with us, we have people employing staff, and management there is allowed to sign the contracts. We're talking thousands of people, but the initial contract must be signed off by top management.
Fantastic. I hope that answers your question, Anonymous. I wanna get into just from an employee point, I mean from an employer point of view, what are the key red flags that companies need to be what is this? They need to look out for, especially when they're engaging with contract employees.
Again, communication. So what could happen if a company works with contract employees? They might not treat them exactly the same, but they must understand this employee they must communicate expectation. So an employee should have a job description. An employee should have something to tell them. So big companies must make sure, companies must just make sure that this is correctly communicated. Because should that person not meet your expectation and it goes to CCMA, one of the first questions will be, does that person even know what they have to do? Then the other downfall is if we don't train. We have to train staff. We have to tell them exactly, once again, what to do. We've got to stipulate things in our contracts, like when we give a company equipment and it
Mhm.
needs to be returned in a good fashion. That is, we have to be covered for that. Got to make sure that those clauses, certain clauses must be in your contract. Like I said, confidentiality is important. Then there's something else that companies need to be on the lookout for, especially when we're dealing with service providers or people that's coming in on just an ad hoc basis. Whatever that person does for the company, you own because you paid them. So be careful. Some people just say, oh, you know what? Can you do me a favor and design my logo? Simple example. But it
Yeah.
has happened before that people designed a logo for free and the company never took ownership of that logo. That company grew very big. All of a sudden, the people say, you know what, you owe me money because I own this logo actually still. You see, so there must be a transaction. Not be very careful what you just receive from people. Sometimes when not, there's no problem again until now you're starting to make a lot of money. So be careful not to enter into any negotiation giving people. There must be a trade. I'll give you this for that if you want to do that. That happens under small businesses, but you still have an invoice or form of this is now mine. I own it. And it's not a problem when you small, but it becomes a problem when you grow bigger.
Okay. Now tell me, I just literally just came into my mind, especially when you just gave that example. Do verbal agreements cover, are they covered as contracts? Can I say, but you said one, two, three? Can that be a contract?
It can be, but that's once again a very, very specialized area. What I would say out of experience is when you agree with someone and now you start to act accordingly. So if we just agree on business and you start to pay me for that business, and
Mhm.
it starts, in other words, we're starting to make it happen. It can be said, but even though there wasn't an agreement, you actually acted according to an agreement. There's not an agreement needed. But
Okay.
I'm not a specialist. A lawyer will tell you, but it is definitely not a ground that you want to walk in, too much. But it is there. So if somebody tells you, listen, do this business for me, I will pay you, and we don't always go into contract. Then they start doing the work and you've started paying them. That is already an acknowledgement of a business agreement.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We've got Diketseng, and I hope this question will be clear enough. Should the business workshop the amended contracts just before sign off by the CEO or after? Should it be
Always.
after?
Yeah. No, before the CEO signs up. I don't know. Again, it could change from company to company, but I don't like personally to get involved. They must finish everything. That's why I've got people that I trust. We pay them. That's their roles, leaders, managers, whatever. They workshop it. They see that it works. They have to make sure it's legal, completely legal, and then present it to the CEO for sign off. Then that person's work is just easier.
Fantastic. Thank you. If you do have any questions, please do ask on the chat and we will ask those questions. There's just the CEO. I mean, there's not a CEO. You're the CEO. I say there's a question right here from Lillian Isaacs, and she says, "What if an employee has a fixed term contract, right? And there's been a renewal over and over a couple of times, and it has exceeded 1 year. Should the termination notice still remain at 1 week, or does that change? Especially since the contract is now it's short-term contracts. It's now every time it's short-term contracts that's being continuously renewed.
You're actually not allowed to do that. According to law, when you carry on, you can renew a short-term limited duration contract uh, once, perhaps twice, but you cannot continue to do that. That's illegal because that person has the expectation of permanency. The law and the commissioner CCMA will look at it and say, why can you not put this person on a permanent contract? Because if you had this position already for a year, what makes you repeat it? So be extremely careful for repeating limited duration contracts. We sometimes put people and recommend a limited duration contract for certain things like a peak season or a
Yeah.
time where you're not going to have enough staff. That there's a reason for limited duration contracts. Sometimes when somebody starts to work, you only need somebody on a short basis, limited duration. If she then goes and says that person after a year, just to answer the second part of that question, if somebody has now done it, which is already wrong, you've got to stick to the basic conditions of employment because that person is now with you for longer than a year. So the employment, the basic conditions kicks in and protects them. But and they can actually then expect a longer notice period. But I'm extremely reluctant to tell people to go ahead because it's not legal. We've even got temporary employment services that battle with that because we're not allowed to do that. You have to be fair towards people. And if you can't keep them or if you know it's only for 6 months, then that's it. That's from the beginning, the agreement. That person understands it. Or you have in the beginning a 3 month period before they go on. But it's very unfair to keep somebody on that. And the law, once again, we go back to the foundation of our Constitution, protects human rights.
Okay. Fantastic. So then in that situation, I just wanna, so we can actually close the loop there for Lillian. In that situation where she finds herself or the employee finds themselves, the contract is continuously being renewed. What is the conversation like with HR?
So there are two things. First of all, they can go to HR and say, listen, you've been keeping me on a temporary basis. It wasn't discussed initially, and I'm trying to understand why don't you keep me? So two things could happen. HR could say, we understand, and we will give you a permanent contract.
Mhm.
But if they don't, there is a very strong chance that if this person goes to CCMA, that they will win the case. If they have had numerous renewals of a temporary employment contract. So if HR or the company says, no ways, we're not going to help you, you can always sort of feel when something is not 100% fair, then
Yeah.
she may possibly be able to go. She might not want to lose her job, but you know what the problem is at the end with that is you can also start to be on the lookout for other work. So if a company keeps you on a limited duration contract, personally, I would suggest that somebody goes and start to look out. Discuss it with your company and tell them because it's not good.
Mhm.
It's very uncertain for a person. We should use the law. We should use the system. If a person is not good enough for a position, then we have to go through a process. We've got to train them. We've got to do that. We can't just take advantage of it.
All right. I hope that answers your question there, Lillian. So there's a question on the fundamentals, but I know that we still have to walk through the five-step contract health check, and I hope that will answer the question around the fundamentals of a contract, whether it's for independent, because I think the question was directly for independent contracts. So I'm going to first ask that you walk us through your five-step contract health check that you use in your company to make sure that this contract is something that I'm going to go for. And I hope that answers the question. If it does not answer the question, Nadine, please just let us know if it hasn't. All right. So Mishka, I'm going to let you just give us that five-step health check.
All right. So first of all, like I said many times, it will still stay number one. You never contract out of law. So whatever you're busy with, understand there's a legal factor and you've got to have a binding contract there. Otherwise, you're just going to not make it. That's the very first thing in a health check that we do. We have to align to the relevant conversation and legal standards. So depending where you sign the contract, understand whether it's for employment, whether you're signing it for anything else, make sure you understand the legal requirements of it. That's the second health check that we always put in place and that I will recommend. Then we have to make sure that there is compliance in every sense. In other words, when you do a contract, you've got to comply with, say, health and safety risks, say, POPI Act. These are things that has been instituted. Once again, it comes back to the law, but that needs to be covered in a contract. So make sure that the compliance according to government, according to what is needed, is in that contract. And compliance has to do with salaries as well because people pay UIF, they pay. What's happening with that? Stipulate that. That is a compliance factor that you need to make sure is part of your contract. Then we can also say that risk allocation and liability. I'll give you an example. I want to give you an example of this. We have staff working at a client. Now, the client has a certain there's a risk because the guys can be on the road, they can be hijacked, it can be all of these kind of things. Stipulate in the contract. Now, this is going to affect your contract with your client as well as with your employee. So from that side, we've got to understand the employee needs to know we've got COIDA in South Africa. So every employer should have that. And there is an injury on duty. That's how we're going to handle it. Stipulate that in the contract. Stipulate in your contract with your client. Where does my responsibility begin and where does yours stop?
Yeah.
Because it will be their premises. A temporary employment service norm always provides staff for somebody else on their premises, wherever they are. They have to make sure that they are safe. The risk on their side must be taken care of. Because when we start to work with these things, especially in South Africa with the Department of Labor, when they come out, when there's an incident, they do a check, a health check to see. So your contract must stipulate, and when you are dealing with your client, don't think we are going to get out of it. Remember, according to law, we are jointly and severally liable with our client. So when I'm talking to a big company, make sure your temporary employment service know what they're doing. Make sure the UIF is actually getting paid over. Make sure all these things are done according to law, because if not, you can get yourself into really big, big trouble. Then just want to look at what is extremely important is like we talked about now, there's a temporary contract. When is there a renewal? What does your contract stipulate? Make sure that if you need to change somebody over from a temporary contract to a permanent contract or to a long-term contract, that you do it on time. You cannot work without a contract. It's illegal. I can't tell you how many people. I've been a business consultant for many years. I just can't understand why people do these things, because if we don't have employment contracts, your business is basically you're running an illegal operation. It is the same thing with us setting in something like Zero in place for our businesses. We use Zero because it's a scalable software that's fantastic for bookkeeping. And I mean, we could use it from having very little, making very little money until now, multi-millions, hundreds of millions, because it's such a strong system. But many people say, oh, but you know what? I take the odd cash here and there. I don't declare it. And you know, the sad thing about that is not just is it illegal, but you're not giving yourself a fair chance to build value into your company. If you ever want to sell it and you do not reflect how much money you're truly making because you're scared of paying tax, it's just harming yourself. Once again, getting back to things that we always have to make sure of, that we don't get ourselves into the wrong thing in terms of contracts. That will be one of it. Make sure you understand risk. Make sure you understand liability. Make sure that in a case where the client's going, in our type of industry where we've got an employment service, if the client can't pay you anymore, how do you mitigate risk? You
Yeah.
know, for instance, with us, we get millions. So if a client can't pay us immediately before we pay out, we need to make sure that we get an insurance against that, because we've got to pay our staff. Who's responsible for what? You see, so make sure that where we talk risk and liability, and when we talk when things need to be renewed, is stipulated. It's checked. We've got a checklist. You've got to have a system in place. Pop-ups. Simple example, if you have drivers, are their licenses always up to
Mm.
date? Do we have PDPs up to date? These are small examples, but when people work with certain equipment, they've got to have a medical test. And how often do we have to do this test? How often do we have to go for an eye test? So these are checklists that I suggest everybody have in place if you're running a company and you're serious about it.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think that was quite comprehensive in terms of the checklist that we need to have, but that also makes us realize that sometimes we are not capable rather, but like we might not be fully equipped to actually do it by ourselves, whether we're
Mm.
running a small business, whether we're running a big business. So that means that we need to bring in professionals to actually help us in this, because there's so many, I'm seeing the questions that are coming here. And a lot of them is related to the law and what happens when this happens, what happens when that happens, and does maybe the labor relation cover this, and what does it say about it? And yes, in as much as we can read about it, sometimes you just don't understand the jargon, and there's also other parts that we might be missing. Like right now, when you're speaking about the drivers, that they need to have the eye test. How long should they have the eye? How many times should they have the eye test? There's so many different things that we can speak about right now. But now someone might be asking themselves, okay, this feels like a whole lot, right? And how do I get hold of you when I have all of these questions?
Okay, so they can actually have a look on our website, www.bdcs.global, and then we have an info@bdcs.global. When they send an email, they can just mark it in the subject line for attention Miskyah and then Masterclass next to it, because then it will be forwarded to me if they've got anything in that regard. Yes, thank you.
Yes. We'll actually make sure that even on the socials that we do keep all of that information so everyone can get that. Lillian says, thank you. This has been quite informative for her and she would love to attend more. I think you should have a podcast.
I think so.
There's
Yeah.
so many good questions that are coming up. Velapi and I think it was Olisani. That question has already been answered. It's similar to what Lillian has asked about the renewal of contracts, of short-term contracts, that you do need to firstly check what the contract says and if it's been renewed for too long. I think Olisani mentioned that it was for 7 years.
Oh.
And if the labor relations does cover it. So already you said from 1 year it's illegal. So 7 years is quite a very long time to continuously be renewing that contract. Well, thank you very much to everyone that has joined. I know there's some questions that you might still have, and like we just mentioned, that you can contact Miskyah, right? Or Miskyah.
Yes, right.
You can contact Miskyah and her business just to get even more information. Maybe there's particularly a contract that you are in or probably just have signed that you're like, I think what you just mentioned is illegal, or what I have done is not comprehensive enough to actually protect me under the law, or to even protect the employee under the law. So I think we can, like I said, this is such a huge topic. But no, thank you very much, Dr. Miskyah, for joining us and just for giving us just a direction when it comes to contracts. And also thank you everyone for joining us today. I think we should have more of these discussions. So please look out on our social media on discussions such as these. But thank you very much for joining us. And I think we'll just close it from there. Is there anything you'd like to add, Dr. Miskyah?
Yeah, I'm going to say one last thing, because that last person's remark will stick with me unless I say this. Understand, if you're on a temporary employment contract or on any other contract, you've got the same rights than a permanent person. So the law stipulate that a temporary person, there is no such thing anymore. Many years ago, we had casual labor. That person is now any person that works more than 24 hours a month in a company has the same right than a permanent employee. So don't let anybody keep you on a temporary contract and don't give you your leave that's due, your sick leave. You've got the full same rights as a permanent person. It's literally, nobody can get beyond that. The CCMA will actually help you with that. I hope I didn't make some problems here for some employers.
Maybe. Because I'm thinking people are going to have meetings with HR from tomorrow onwards. Which is a good thing, because at the end of the day, just like you said, a temporary or someone who's working in a short-term period for a business has the exact same benefits. Well, not benefits, but it has the exact same rights as someone that has a permanent position. So I think that you freed a lot of people
Thank you
You've
so
really
much.
seen a lot of people
Thank you,
in that.
Mokoena, for your
Well,
time.
thank
Thank you
you so
for
much.
hosting us today. It was absolutely lovely. Thank you for everyone that attended, all the lovely questions that's come through. And thank you. I wish you all of the best.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. I know people are just bringing in questions, though.
Wow.
I think we're not gonna continue, but I think you are going to be getting a whole lot of emails.
Okay, fantastic. We'll
Yeah.
set up another session. Thank you so much, Mokoena.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.